Hey everybody, my name's Shane, and we're so glad that you're here as we continue our series called Start the Party. It's all about the promise Jesus made about getting the most out of life. The promise that we all have what it takes to be a party starter. And honestly, who doesn't love a good party? In fact, think about what makes a great party. Is it the right playlist, the right place to hang out, maybe some good dancing, video games, board games, improv games, it's a lot of games, snacks, books to discuss. Yeah, that's a party to some people. Movies to watch. We're all different when it comes to partying. Some of us love being around all kinds of people, and some of us love to just hang out with a few close friends. Look, however you party, today we want to talk about how there's a place for everybody, or at least there should be. And I remember experiencing this when I first moved from Michigan to Arizona. I was 7 years old. I was a kid, and it was my first day of second grade. I'm in a new state with a whole new group of people, and I stick out in this classroom. I was taller than everybody else. I was from a different state, so I didn't have the same experiences or know the area like the other kids. And I dressed differently. I just had a different vibe. And now I'm in the West with these like cool Arizona kids, and I didn't know what to do. And that first recess, one I will never forget. We walk out, and some kids are playing on the playground, on the swings. Others are playing basketball. Some are like chasing each other because that's what you do in elementary school. And then there was a group of guys who were playing football. And I was not a big football fan, but I told you, I was taller than everybody else. And they thought, hey, maybe you can be our center. And they invited me in to play. Immediately, I felt like this was my group of people. And now I'm a legend. The greatest center in the history of Sonoma Ranch Elementary, which means honestly nothing. But I bet there's a chance you can relate to this. In fact, I'm pretty sure that you can, because in a lot of ways, it can feel like there are two groups in life. There's the insiders, which were all the other groups of kids I saw running around the playground. And then there's the outsiders, which is exactly what I felt like in this brand new state, in this brand new classroom, until I was invited in. And think about it. This same thing probably happens in your school, in your neighborhood, maybe even on your sports team, or it could happen in your friend groups. Maybe even at home, you experience this. Maybe you have a group of friends who've been close since you were little, and with them, you feel in. But then maybe you moved into a new neighborhood or in a new zone in your district, and you feel more out when you show up at school. Maybe you have different interests than a lot of people in your small group. So sometimes you feel out even with your small group. Or maybe you feel like you can be yourself with your family, and that makes home feel like a place where you're in. Sometimes, whether we realize it or not, we're the ones making other people feel like they're out. We tend to stay close to the people who look like us, think like us, like what we like, and do what we do. They're in, and that means everybody else is out. Okay, let me ask you a question about this, and I'll give you a second to think about your response. Where in life do you feel like you're the most in? Okay, let me ask you another question. What's one reason someone might feel like they're out with certain people? Okay, here's the thing. The kind of party that Jesus is inviting all of us to be a part of in this life, that party is filled with all sorts of different people. Remember, when we say party here, we're not talking about a literal party. Those are great, but that's not quite it for this. We mean any effort to celebrate, serve, or just enjoy being with others in a way that adds value to life. And so being a party starter means being someone who does that for all people. People who are like us and people who aren't. People who we're in with and people that we're out with. The invitation isn't exclusive, it's actually inclusive. And that means if we want to be party starters, we have to be the kind of people who see everyone as someone worthy of the invitation. Because in God's eyes, they are. But come on, let's be real for a second. This is challenging, right? It's not easy, and it doesn't come naturally to many of us. So what would it look like for us to be party starters who include everyone? Well, there's actually a story from Jesus' life that I think can help us out here. One of Jesus' friends, this guy named Matthew, he recorded this story from the life of Jesus. So before we start reading, let me just set the scene for you. Jesus had just accepted an invitation to have dinner at Matthew's house. Yes, the Matthew who actually wrote down this story. And as we keep reading, we find out that Jesus wasn't the only guest on the list. In fact, the table was filled with all kinds of people. Take a look. Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. Okay, there's some details that we need to know because the people around the table with Jesus back then, they were definitely not the insiders. Tax collectors were considered some of the most corrupt and frustrating people around. And the disreputable sinners were people with bad reputations. These were not the kinds of people anyone thought Jesus would be sharing a meal with. Okay, let's stop for a second again. And let me ask you another question. Does it surprise you to know that Jesus shared a meal with people considered out in their ancient society? Why or why not? Look, I'll be honest, when I was in high school, it was surprising to me to read a story like that. See, a group of religious leaders at the time, some guys known as Pharisees, they had a real problem with this dinner party. And here's what they had to say about it. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with such scum?" I mean, that's pretty harsh, right? For the Pharisees, the people around the table at that meal, they definitely didn't deserve the invitation to party with Jesus. The Pharisees were purposely keeping others on the outside. And then they were judging and questioning Jesus and his friends for not keeping them on the outside. Here's what Jesus said in response to them. When Jesus heard this, he said, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do." Then he added, "Now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they're sinners." See, Jesus knew that people had the tendency to categorize the tax collectors and sinners as bad. And to be fair, they had definitely done some messed up stuff, but Jesus' response shows us that he saw them differently. He wasn't there to shame or exclude people, and he wasn't there to only spend time with people who lived just like he did. He wasn't concerned with who the Pharisees or anyone else thought that he should give his time and attention to. No, Jesus came to care for those who needed him most. He came to show grace, love, and mercy to the sinners, the tax collectors, and anyone else who's ever been out of a group. He came to show mercy. Anytime we see an act of mercy, it's a direct reflection of what God is like. It's an opportunity to pause and take notice that you can see God at work every day. What does it look like to show mercy in today's world? Okay, for starters, it's letting people know that they belong at the table. Instead of excluding people or judging them or keeping them on the outside, mercy invites them in. It's not just about seeing everyone as someone who deserves to be in, but also taking the step to invite them in. That's a really important detail. Okay, I want us to think about this a little bit differently just for a second, because anytime we read a story with multiple characters, it's actually an invitation for us to see ourselves more clearly. Here's what I mean. Isn't it true that we tend to associate ourselves with the most positive character or character with the best outcome or best intentions in that story that we're reading? Okay, let's look at this story a little differently. What if each person in the story has something to show us about ourselves when we take the time to look more closely? Let's take just a few minutes to reflect on what we just read together. You can continue to think about your answers with your small group later, but for now, I just want you to write down the first thing that comes to mind. Okay, first, let's think about Matthew. Matthew is the one creating the guest list and preparing the house and being hospitable to the outcast in his community. So think about your response to this statement. If Matthew was my best friend at school, throwing a party for the left out, bullied, and mean kids, I would fill in the blank. Okay, now let's talk about Jesus in the story. Jesus is showing up and saying yes to an unlikely invitation. Think about your response to this statement. If I were invited to an event where I knew that everyone associated with the gathering had a negative reputation, I would fill in the blank. All right, next, let's think about the tax collectors. The tax collectors show up knowing their complicated status in the culture at the time. The average person actually despised them, but in some circles, they actually had power. And they were gathering for this meal with others who weren't like them. Think about your response to this statement. If I were both hated and respected and got invited to a dinner with other hated and respected people, I would fill in the blank. Okay, now let's talk about one more group of people. It's just the other people that were at the table. I mean, think about the others who were sitting there. They probably knew that their lifestyle was disapproved of by the other people, and despite knowing that they were humans worthy of dignity and community. Think about your response to this statement. I know all the wrong that I've done, and I know that according to other people, I don't deserve anything in life, but I've just been invited to a dinner party. I feel fill in the blank. Look, no matter how you responded to all of those, I think we all realize that there's nothing worse than going somewhere and feeling isolated and unwanted. But on the other hand, few things feel as good as someone making space for you and making sure you feel like you belong. I mean, think about that for a second. Have you ever felt welcome and included by someone when you really needed it? It's amazing, isn't it? That's what Jesus did here. And that's what we can do for others too. The tax collectors and sinners might have been considered on the outside because of their behavior and their previous actions. And honestly, maybe you've seen others the same way, or maybe you've even been the one that people see that way. The good news is this, that's not our job. We don't get to decide who's in and who's out. As the ultimate party starter, Jesus showed us that everyone has a seat at the table. Think about it this way. A party starter knows that everyone is invited. Jesus showed the tax collectors and sinners that he didn't see them the way that others did. They had a seat at his table. They were invited. And the same is true for you and me today. We have the opportunity to start the party by remembering that everyone, us included, is in with God. So, rather than keeping our guest list exclusive or choosing to see others as out, we have the chance to be the kind of party starters who invite everyone to the full, amazing life that Jesus is offering. And here's how. Invite someone to the party. I mean, who in your life can you include? Who could use an invite from you? Who have you been treating like they're out that may need an invitation to remember that they're in with Jesus no matter what? Who is one person in your life you can make an effort to include? When you think about your life and the people you're most comfortable with and spend the most time with, what categories do they fall into? Let's talk about it. I want you to think about your table for a second. Think about the people that you would typically invite to your table. Maybe you would only invite athletes to your table because you're an athlete and that's who you enjoy spending the most time around. So you only invite athletes. Or maybe you only invite people in your neighborhood or from your area of town to your table. Maybe you only invite people who you find attractive to the table because ultimately they're the ones who are going to help raise your clout on social media. Or maybe you only want to invite people who have the same hobbies to your table because you just get each other, so it's easier to spend time with them. See, we all have a table, and if you're only inviting certain types of people to your table, there's a chance you're missing out on some really incredible things. So here's my question to you. Who do you need to invite to your table? Okay, now let's think about this a little bit differently. Let's not think about our tables. Let's think about the tables of other people. Maybe people who are different than us that even if they've invited us, we would tend to avoid completely. Maybe there are some tables that we've been invited to sit at that we just won't. Maybe it's the tables of people who enjoy different foods than we do or are a part of different cultures than we are. We just don't get it. We don't understand. So we tend to stay away from those tables. Or maybe it's people who enjoy different entertainment or like different art and we just don't get it. So we're like, yeah, that's not a table I'm gonna sit at. Or maybe It's people that have a different financial status than you do. And you think, I just don't understand their life, so I'm not going to accept an invitation to sit at their table. Or maybe it's people who hold different religious beliefs than you do. They might be nice people, but you're like, they just think differently, so no, I can't sit at their table. Look, this is not about any of these people who are different than you are. This is about you and me not being willing to step into the lives and the worlds of other people. Here's what I want you to think about. Whose table do you need to accept an invitation to? Who's offering you a ticket into their life, into their world, to understand them better? Who maybe you would typically judge or stay away from? Who's sitting at your table? And whose table do you need to accept an invitation to? All right, let's get back into it and talk about it some more. It's interesting to think about things a little bit differently from time to time, isn't it? If there's one thing that you can remember from today, it's that a party starter knows that everyone is invited. We hope the church is a place where everyone feels included, a place where everyone knows that they're in. And that's why we have small groups. We want these to be safe places where you can show up just as you are and find yourself surrounded by people who want to make sure that you know you're invited to the party. So I hope you'll take that seriously as you continue talking about this with your group. All right, here's the last thing that I want you to be thinking about. Who is one person that you want to make sure feels in with you this week? Here's why. It's because a party starter knows that everyone is invited.